We can hear you well. You might want to tilt your camera just a little bit because you're just the top of your head's getting cut off a little bit on the screen, but you're pretty good overall. Uh,
Good afternoon, Chamber members. For those of you I have not met yet, I'm Sabrina Binkley, Head of School at Spruce Tree Montessori and Chair of the Fairbanks Board of Directors. I'd like to take a moment, as we do each week, to thank our executive partners whose logos you saw on the screen before we began our program today. These businesses provide a rock-solid foundation for the Fairbanks Chamber to be successful throughout the year. Their support is not only financial. These businesses share knowledge and expertise that help shape and direct our advocacy efforts and create awareness that drives economic strength and growth for interior Alaska. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. I'd like to welcome Brenna online to help us recognize our new and renewing members. Brenna?
Thank you, Sabrina. So we'd like to thank a executive partner for renewing their membership with us today, and that's Walmart. So thank you to Walmart for renewing your executive partnership with the Chamber. We'd also like to thank a few of our renewing members: Advanced Printing Company, Great Northwest Inc., Sadler's Home Furnishing, Fairbanks Job Center, part of the Department of Labor, and North Star Ballet. We'd also like to thank our 110% members that have contributed above and beyond their membership dues to help us with our advocacy actions. And that's the Law Office of Mamie S. Brown and Zimmerman and Wallace. Today's membership minute, I'd like to focus on something that we've had as a membership benefit for a long time, and that's member deals. Whether it's a member-to-member deal or a member-to-community deal, that's something that you can take advantage of as a member or as a community member, as well as offer. We have one that just added today from LifeMed Alaska, which is one of our executive partners for life flights down to Anchorage. And if you're interested in looking at that, you can check out their website or ours to get that community and new member group deal. If you have any that you'd like to offer, or if you're just curious about what they do, you can give me a call at 907-452-1105. Back to you, Sabrina.
Great, thanks so much, Brenna. So in my board chair today, I wanted to remind everyone that the Fairbanks Chamber's 5 advocacy committees are right now in the process of updating the Chamber's advocacy agenda in preparation for a presentation to our board at our next meeting on October 19th. And as we close in on the November 3rd general election, we have 4 more political forums over the next 3 weeks to help you understand who and what you'll find on your ballot. You can find the full schedule and links to each live stream on our website. And in case you missed any of the previous forums, you can find recordings of each of those online as well. Today's reflective prompt is very simple. Since we have a great program for you today, I just want to say 2 short sentences. It takes all of us. Please do your part. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marissa for her President and CEO report.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sabrina. I just have a couple of quick announcements as well. First of all, I just wanted to ask everyone, are you following the Fairbanks Chamber on social media? The Fairbanks Chamber is on Facebook and Instagram, and it's a great place to find news and information about our members, events, programs, and initiatives that affect businesses in our community. If you already follow us, then you know last week we got an exclusive look at the first load being deposited into the Barnes Creek Heap Leach, which is a project that will secure up to 1,200 direct and indirect jobs related to Kinross Fort Knox Gold Mine. We also then the next day got to go visit with Westmark Hotel and Conference Center as they unveiled their newly renovated lobby, where they are ready to welcome you and provide you and your guests first-class hospitality right here in downtown Fairbanks. My other reminder for today is that it is a local election day. I was at my polling location first thing this morning. It was super fast and efficient. There were no lines, which was good and bad, I guess. So just want to make sure that people have a plan to go and vote today if you haven't done so already. So make sure that depending on where you live in the borough, that you know that your ballot will include possibly city council, definitely borough assembly, school board, interior gas utility board, and also if you're in the city of Fairbanks, there is a proposition, and if you're a borough resident, there's a borough proposition. So you can find links to all of those sample ballots and other voting information on our website under the political forums tab. And then later this week, we'll start rolling information out about the general election and how to vote early, how to vote absentee, and then of course, how to vote on election day. So we're always encouraging our members and people in our community to make a plan to vote. That's where it starts. We will have a higher voter turnout if we have more people making a plan to go and cast their votes on election day or leading up to election day. You can find all of this information and more at our website, which is fairbankschamber.org. Back to you, Sabrina.
Great, thanks, Marissa. Great advice. Okay, now for our main presentation. Our goal with all of our political forums is to help you in the audience understand the decisions you're facing during this fall's election cycle. The ballot measure being discussed today will appear on the general election ballot on November 3rd. The Fairbanks Chamber is a nonpartisan organization which advocates for the conditions that will allow businesses of all sizes to prosper in our region. We do not endorse any political candidates. However, we do choose sides on ballot initiatives when it comes to issues that impact the business community. And for some, we formally and publicly, through a majority vote by our board, support or oppose the content. When we take a stance on a ballot initiative like the one we're discussing today, that decision is based on the needs and desires of our membership, the business community. The Greater Fairbanks Chamber, based on a decision by our board of directors, opposes the latest attempt to raise taxes through a ballot measure. Initiative petitions ask voters to make simple yes or no decisions about complex issues without subjecting them to detailed expert analysis. We simply believe this is not the best way to make public policy that is in the best interests of our state. The Fair Share Act, as it is commonly known, is a targeted tax on some of the state's largest investors and would stifle future investment. Today's event will help you understand this ballot initiative and the Chamber's opposition to it. Our moderator for today's event is Fairbanks Chamber volunteer Chad Hutchison, who was born and raised in Fairbanks. He's been a longtime Chamber supporter and has bought and sold a lot of rubber ducky tickets in his lifetime. He's an attorney and has been the State Senate Majority Counsel since 2013, although today he is here in strictly a volunteer and personal capacity. Prior to working with the Senate, starting in mid-2007, he was an attorney here in Fairbanks at Cook, Schumann, and Gross Close. Welcome back, Chad. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. So I will state up front that we hope to have a few audience questions at some point in time at the end of today's presentation. And if any of our online audience has questions throughout the presentation, please just put them in the chat box in YouTube. So I'm going to give a brief initiative overview and then introduce our panelists. So based on the official description you will see on the ballot, Ballot Measure 1 proposes changes to Alaska's tax system for oil and gas. This act would increase the oil and gas production tax for areas of the North Slope where a company produced more than 40,000 barrels of oil per day in the prior year and more than 400 million barrels total. For any areas that meet the production threshold, the tax would be the greater of one of two new taxes. Either one, a tax on the gross value at the point of production of the oil at a rate of 10% when oil is less than $50 per barrel. This tax would increase to a maximum of 15% when oil is $70 per barrel or higher. No deductions could take the tax below the 10% to 15% floor. Or two, an additional tax, which would be based on a calculation of a production tax value for the oil that would allow lease expenditure and transportation cost deductions. This tax on production tax value would be calculated based on the difference between the production tax value of the oil and $50. The difference between the two would be multiplied by the volume of oil, and then that the amount would be multiplied by 15%. The existing per taxable barrel credit would not apply. Confused yet? You're not alone, friends. Luckily, we have some folks here who will shed a little light on the ballot measure and what it'll mean for businesses in the state of Alaska. So I'd like to introduce the panelists today. Our panelists are number one, Kara Moriarty, who's the president and CEO of the Alaska Oil and Gas Association and is very familiar with the history of Fairbanks, so it's good to have her back. We have Joan Johnson, who is the senior account manager of Span Alaska Transportation and is a great statewide leader. We have Sarah Obed, who is the Senior Vice President of External Affairs for Doyon Limited and is a great chair of the Government Relations Committee for the Fairbanks Chamber. And we have Carl Hanneman, who is the CEO of International Tower Hill Mines and is one of the great leaders when it comes to mining policy in the state of Alaska. So panelists, can you please start by introducing yourselves and telling us briefly what your business or organization does. We have 1 minute each, and the rotation is going to be Kara first, then followed by Joan, then Sarah, then Carl. 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Chad. And it's thank you to the Chamber for the invitation and for putting this panel together about what I think is one of the riskiest and reckless ballot initiatives I've been involved in. As Chad mentioned, I used to live in Fairbanks. In fact, I think I may have taught Chad how to sell rubber ducky tickets first when he interned for me at the Fairbanks Chamber a long time ago. So I will take no credit for Chad's success as an individual and professional in the Fairbanks community. But for the last 15 years, I have worked for the Alaska Oil and Gas Association. We are the trade association for the oil and gas industry in Alaska. And as I mentioned, this is my 5th ballot measure that I've been involved in or managed a campaign, and always on the opposing side. Ballot measures often may have good intentions, but because they're not vetted through a normal process, there's a lot of unintended consequences. So as I mentioned, this is my 5th one over the last 15 years. And I do look forward to talking about this issue more in depth. And thank you very much. I wish I could be back in Fairbanks in person, but I am happy to be here virtually today.
Thank you. Joan?
Good morning. Good morning, Chad. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you to the Chamber of Commerce. I'm Joni Johnson, and I've been in the transportation industry since 1990. We handle logistics from all points in the lower 48 to Alaska. And our corporate office is in Auburn, Washington, and we ship primarily with Matson out of the port of Tacoma twice a week with a 6-day transit time from the date of sailing to delivery in Alaska. We have facilities in Anchorage, Kenai, Soldotna, Kodiak, Wasilla, and of course Fairbanks. And we handle everything from A to Z that comes to Alaska. My focus over the past 30 years has been on construction, local suppliers, electrical, plumbing, tires, lumber, animal supplies, and everything else in between. Of course, oil and gas, that's the huge part of many of my customers' business. However, I don't have any direct contracts with the oil and gas industry, but my customers do. And I can see a direct impact on them when the work is strong and the investment is in Alaska. It's definitely when it's economical for the producers, we see a strong growth in the Alaska customers and their business to Alaska. Thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Thank you for those comments, Joni. Sarah?
Thanks, Chad. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Obed. I work at Doyon Limited, and Doyon is the Alaska Native Corporation that's based here in Fairbanks. We have 12.5 million acres of land, and we have operations in government contracting, telecommunications, oil and gas services on the North Slope, and resource development. And I'm really happy to participate today. As you mentioned, Chad, I also chair the Government Relations Committee for the Chamber and have been actively involved with that chamber for a couple of years now. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Carl?
Yes, good afternoon, Chamber members. My name is Carl Hahnemann, and I'm born and raised in Fairbanks, graduated from University of Alaska with a mining engineering degree. I'm currently the CEO of International Tower Hill Mines, and we have an 11.5 million ounce resource in our gold deposit at Livengood, 70 miles north of Fairbanks, that we've been studying for the last 10 years. We're not in production, but we have a potential for scale and scope similar to Fort Knox. But our project will require 1.5 to 2 billion in capital, take 4 to 5 years to permit, and another 2 or 3 years to build. So it's a long-term project. The economics of the project are challenging. We've been working on engineering and optimization. And with the recent gold price strength, we are now moving forward to update our pre-feasibility study on the project. So glad to be here. Look forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. And with that, we'll move into a few of these good questions. So ballot measure 1 focused predominantly on the largest fields on the North Slope, Alpine, Kaparick, and Crudo Bay. What is your connection to those fields, and how would a slowdown in production affect your business? We have approximately 2 minutes, and the rotation is going to be Joni first, followed by Sarah, then Carl, and Kara. Joni?
Thank you, Chad. As I said earlier, my connection to the largest oil fields are very indirect. I do not have any direct contracts with the oil companies. My connection is with the businesses that have projects on the North Slope. My concern, if there is a slowdown in production, many of the local businesses and jobs will be affected. The businesses I work with encourage and promote a strong relationship with the oil and gas industry. They employ residents in Alaska to handle those services needed for the North Slope. And that's everything from pipe to fabrication of projects to keep the industry going strong. I know that in my daily work, 90, if not 100% of the people I work with are impacted by a strong investment in Alaska from the oil and gas companies. If there is a slowdown in the production, many local businesses and jobs will be affected. There will be a reduction of the commodities that come to the state of Alaska through the oil and gas industry. If those businesses are not getting the bids and the work due to the slowdown, that will be a huge downward trickle effect on the entire state. We employ Alaskans, and if we don't have materials to ship, whether it be small projects or large, that will make a huge difference on the amount of jobs that any company will have in the state of Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joni. Sarah?
Thanks, Chad. So, just briefly introducing Doyon earlier, I mentioned that we do work in oilfield services in Alaska, and Doyon wholly owns a number of companies, including probably the most well-known Doyon Drilling. We also have Doyon Remote Facilities and Services, where we own camps that are primarily used on the North Slope. We have a partnership in engineering, and we also have Doyon Associated, which is a union shop. We have Mid-Alaska Pipeline, which is actually a pipeline that's operated by in conjunction with Doyon Associated. So Mid-Alaska Pipeline is the pipeline between North Pole and Fairbanks. And so that's the whole field of our oil field services. And they are a big part of Doyon's businesses. Doyon Drilling is kind of the flagship company for Doyon Limited in the oil field services. It provides a lot of revenue and income to Doyon, and also a lot of jobs to Alaskans and to our shareholders. And our oil field businesses provided services to both Alpine and Kaparick for a long time. The current pandemic slowdown has impacted all our businesses, both inside and outside of the oil field services component. And hundreds of jobs for our employees have been lost this year. That was publicized early on. So our view is that less production really means less jobs across the oil field, and Doyon expects to see fewer jobs if this ballot measure passes.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Carl?
Yes, thanks, Chad. Power Hill Mines doesn't have a direct connection to the largest fields on the North Slope, but we do have an indirect connection, and that is about quality of life. We want our existing and future employees to live, work, and play in a state with a vibrant and growing economy. So a slowdown in the oil industry is not good for anybody, including us.
Thank you very much, Carl. Kara?
Well, thank you for the question. I think obviously, clearly, being the trade association president, my business depends on a healthy oil and gas industry. But if you take a look at this ballot measure, it is currently targeted on the 3 largest fields, as you said, Chad. they currently make up 84% of our current production. So while the new fields and new discoveries are important long term, I think the North Slope, Prudhoe, Kuparic, and Alpine has been described as the heart, lungs, brain, the center of the health of the industry. And a couple weeks ago, Joe Marushak was at the Alaska Chamber Fall Forum, and he said that unfortunately, especially with prices the way they are, that if ballot measure 1 passes, they are unlikely to continue a drilling program as planned in 2021. So just to follow up on what Sarah just said, that obviously trickles down to those rigs that Doyon uses on the North Slope for a lot of the companies, including ConocoPhillips. But I think it's important to mention it's not just the companies immediately impacted by the tax who are opposed. I represent a broad organization from companies on the North Slope to Cook Inlet to Alyeska Pipeline to the in-state refineries, including Petrostar and your backyard. I cannot find a single oil and gas company today that supports ballot measure 1, even companies in Cook Inlet. Blue Crest Energy is a small company. They're having problems attracting investment to Alaska, and ballot measure 1 hasn't even passed yet. But investors know that there is this threat of a tax on investors on the North Slope after they've made their investment, and they're worried about that trickle down. Oil Search, we know, is one of the new companies to Alaska looking at the Pikka development. And I'm just going to read this quote. Their CEO said a few weeks ago, quote, "Anything that changes the fiscal structure is detrimental, and we're, Oil Search, not immune to it because our volumes will be in excess of the threshold required by ballot measure 1. So I think there's this misnomer that this is only going to impact the big fields, but it impacts everybody on the North Slope and in Cook Inlet.
Thank you, Kara. Great points. So we're going to move on to the next question, and this has to do with taxes. The ballot measure would increase the production tax on oil between 150% to 300%, depending on the price of oil. In this year of challenges related to COVID-19 for all businesses, how would it impact your organization if your taxes were raised up to 300% in a short time frame? We have 1 minute each, and we're going to start with Sarah, and then go to Carl, and then Kara, and then Joni.
Thanks, Chad. So I know we're talking about our businesses for Doyon, and I think 188%, 150% tax increase, a 300% tax increase on Doyon would definitely mean less money to reinvest in our company, and also less for our shareholders. But aside from that, I think that the native corporations in Alaska, we also wanted to know, like, what would be the impact of this ballot measure on our economy, knowing that our economy has already hit a big blow from the coronavirus pandemic. And so the Angst Regional Association did a study, and we learned that if ballot measure 1 passes, there would be a really negative impact on our oil and gas economy here in Alaska. And that's the largest private source of jobs, and certainly impacts state revenue. There's a lot of people that say it doesn't matter if we raise taxes on the oil companies, but the fact is there'll be a dramatic reduction in investment, and that means an impact to future production. The study that the Angst Regional Association did showed that future investment would be likely to decrease by at least 14%. And so that means less royalty income to the permanent fund, and that means less jobs for Doyon's oilfield services.
Thank you, Sarah. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Our gold deposit is not yet in production, and therefore we don't currently pay any production taxes. But we might never have that opportunity if there was to be 150 to 300% tax increase on the mining industry. That's because the economics of our project are very challenging, even in the current environment, with the current tax scheme. So if the mining industry was faced with such a draconian tax increase, it would become even more difficult for our project to be feasible and to raise the capital needed to advance our project. Even the passage of a huge tax increase on the oil industry would have negative ramifications for our project because our investors seek some fiscal stability when allocating capital. Alaska already is challenged by a reputation of changing oil industry taxes too frequently, and another ill-advised change, even to a different industry, will adversely impact our ability to raise capital. So lack of fiscal stability in our state is not good for us either. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that. Kara?
Well, I think as you know, both Sarah and Carl have already mentioned, it would have an impact directly on their businesses. But I would just ask the chamber, you know, when we first heard about this initiative almost a year ago now, I just can't imagine any business in Alaska, whether you have 3 employees or 3,000, that could sustain a tax increase of 150 to 300% without it changing your current business strategy. The proponents like to say that industry spending will continue as normal, but that just doesn't, I just don't know any business that could sustain that level of an increase and not have some type of impact. You know, the Institute of Social and Economic Research economists said a couple weeks ago, when you put the thought of this tax increase in the midst of a global pandemic and low oil prices that was originally started by a price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia, he said, I think it's a challenging time to be thinking about taxes in general on any industry. In the midst of a recession, it's a challenge to remove any type of money from the economy right now. So, you know, not only in the context of 150 to 300% in good times, when we had oil prices at $65 a barrel when the initiative was originally introduced a year ago, we now have prices in the 40s, and I don't see a forecast from any source at this point into the 60s for some time, for many years to come.
Thank you, Kara. Joni?
In this question, I try to think about it from different aspects and different sides, and you're asking how it would impact our organization. So I kind of try to feel about how it would feel with companies that I worked with, and then even kind of applying it to myself. And if our company tax structure were increased by 150 to 300%, it'd be critical to our operations. I talk with businesses that struggle with the increased cost of materials due to this COVID pandemic, when their materials are going up 10 to 20%. And so they're feeling that cost. What in the world would it mean to these businesses if their taxes went up 150 to 300% when we're already struggling with 10 to 20% increases? It just doesn't make any economical sense. I know personally, if my federal income tax or my borough property taxes went up 150 to 300%, it'd be difficult for me to budget and maintain my cost. I mean, think about our home heating, our electricity, our food, our fuel. Those are just a few things that top off my thoughts. If that affected me personally, how does that affect companies who have employees and overhead? Does that not make sense to keep the tax rules on a business and do business with the state of Alaska? We need to keep them consistent. As we've all talked about today, I understand that in the last 15 years, we've changed the rules numerous times. We're known to be a state that's not being very consistent with our tax structure. So with the whole tax increase, I think it's a bad decision.
Thank you very much, Joni. Good thoughts to think about. So we're going to move on to the next question, and this one I'm going to give to Kara. And this question is, if ballot measure 1 passes, there may be increased collected production tax on the short term. However, because of the risk and potential lack of future investment, are you concerned that accumulative production taxes collected will be less in the long term for the state of Alaska? Can you please help us understand that one, Kara?
Yeah, thank you, Chad, for the question. Obviously, the state has a serious fiscal situation. No one is denying that. And oil may need to be part of the mix. But the question is this been the right process to figure out what the right tax structure is? Sarah mentioned the report that the ANCSA Regional Association commissioned. In addition to the 14% less investment over time, they've also forecasted a job loss of 6,300 jobs. So when you think about that long term, you think about the potential opportunities there are in the existing fields. The companies have identified about 11 billion in projects in the existing fields that are targeted by that tax. That's a potential of 150,000 barrels per day increase. And then you look at those new opportunities like Pikka and Oil Search and Repsol has, and then of course Willow out to the west of ConocoPhillips. They've all said that could, over those two projects over time, could be billions of dollars of new revenue. But if they're not being invested in today, that revenue won't be there long term. So while this may provide a short-term hit to state revenue, and at current prices, it's not the $1 billion a year that you hear thrown out. Right now, at current prices, it would mean about $260 million more in our production tax, which may not sound like a lot. However, when you put it in context, our current tax structure today is already about 95% government take. So after we pay for producing the barrel, transporting the barrel from the North Slope, what is left from that barrel, 95% goes to federal, local, and state governments. This puts it over 100%. So IHS Energy did a study about a month ago, a little more than a month ago, I guess, and they are quoted as saying, first of all, ballot measure 1 goes against a recent trend by major jurisdictions. We're not aware of any other jurisdictions thinking about raising taxes to this level in this current environment. But this was their quote, that at current prices, Alaska already has one of the least competitive tax regimes in the world. The Fair Share Act further deteriorates Alaska's competitive position. So again, to answer your question, Chad, well, it may be a short-term hit in revenue. Over the long term, in loss of production, loss of royalties, loss of production tax, it's going to have negative impacts for the long term, which has been confirmed by many outside sources.
Yes, thank you for that, Kara. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and this is something that more people are starting to focus on. This talks about public disclosures of documents. So if ballot measure 1 passes and documents related to oil production become non-confidential, Alaska would be the only U.S. state to require public disclosure of all documents. That's what's written in the ballot initiative associated with tax filings. Legal experts have stated that this likely violates equal protection and equates to compelled speech and is an intrusion on Alaska's unique constitutional right to privacy under the evolved corporate precedents set under the United States Supreme Court under Citizens United. Public disclosure of financial documents harms competition because competitors can review and capitalize on proprietary information and use it to their advantage. It sets a precedent to require industries to publicly disclose confidential tax information. What problems do you see down the line from requiring this type of public disclosure from industry? And this can apply to any industry. We have 1 minute each, and we'll start with Carl, and then we'll go to Kara, and then we'll go to Joni and Sarah. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. You may know, but the mining industry is currently required to provide certain confidential information to segments of the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Revenue. And as long as it remains confidential within the state government, providing this information from the mining industry is appropriate. It ensures that the mining industry tax filings and financial statements can be audited by the state, and the state can also fulfill their mandate to manage the resources for the benefit of all Alaskans. But I would object to the disclosure of this information to the public, which should not be done, especially not in the oil industry. Because the oil industry often obtains their exploration and production rights by a competitive bidding process, very different than the mining industry. And that bidding process ensures the government receives the highest offers for those rights. So I believe that disclosure of the confidential information to the public and potential competitors would just simply make a mockery out of the current competitive process. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Kara?
This is, again, I think one of the challenges with ballot initiatives. I think the intention was for, like the mining industry, the oil and gas industry, as Carl already stated, does provide a lot of confidential data. Our DOR, actually AOGCC, and I think the intent was to try to get more information about the companies that I represent. But the way the ballot initiative is written, it says all documents used in the calculation of the tax. Well, because we have a net production tax system, which allows us to deduct costs, means the Department of Revenue sees what those costs are. So drilling contracts, supplies from big rays, pipe coating from flow line, transportation costs that we pay to either directly or through a contractor. So there were several legislative consultants that looked at this provision, and back in March, one said that the ballot measure would make transparency go way beyond any other regime requires of the industry. And that another one said implementation of the public records requirement would make the state an outlier, as it would be the only state to implement broad disclosure of all taxpayer information. So again, this is one of those unintended consequences, I think, of ballot measures where they had one intention, but the way it's written applies very broadly and really actually is a harm more so to Sarah and Joni's line of work, which I'm sure they'll talk about.
Thank you, Kara. Joni?
Thank you. Yes, I know our industry and our company has proprietary information that is held very near and dear. Confidentiality is critical. And we're in a very competitive industry. We work very hard to have a competitive market. Sharing our financials would not be ideal. We're protective of our corporate culture and our business. We work to keep our pricing competitive and offer a service that our customers know we take great pride in delivering. If this passes in Alaska, and it is the only state in the US that require public disclosure of all documents with tax filing, that would be incredibly unusual. And would that appear to be an incentive for businesses to invest in Alaska? How would that be if they asked you or your company or all companies in the state of Alaska to share their tax filings? And I feel as though this could actually open the door that if we create this with the oil and gas industry, it would open the door for all other industries. And I just have to ask you all to think about, would you want to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Sarah?
Thanks, Chad. This provision is really concerning. If I understand what Kara said correctly, the tax filings would become public. And it wouldn't just be those companies paying the tax, but everybody they do business with. So Doyon is an Alaska-based company. We're based here in Fairbanks. We invest in our businesses. We've got operating companies who actively work as contractors on the North Slope. And, all of our information would be disclosed, if I understand this right. And if that's not the intent of the law, that's what we would be voting on. And that's really concerning. We've got, it's our competitive advantage at risk. And it's anybody who does business on the North Slope here in Fairbanks or across Alaska. And so that is concerning. I think we do have to disclose information to the state, again, it's not necessary for it to be disclosed to the public to have that accountability. So that's my thought.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So we're going to move on to the next question. And this question is, uncertainty in the economy kills business growth by making it hard for businesses to predict which investments will be worthwhile. In a year full of uncertainty, every change to the tax structure makes it harder to invest wisely. The risk of lawsuits draws out that uncertainty over a longer time, so any law which attracts litigation can cause further stagnation in investment. How has this type of extended process, such as litigation or long permit approval processes, affected your business in the past? And we have about 1 minute for each of the answers. We'll start with Joni, we'll go to Sarah, then Carl, then Kara.
Thank you, Chad. So this is a topic that I'm not normally involved in a daily basis. However, I know that we would like us to stay out of any type of litigation and stay focused on what the most important part of our job is. And that's keeping the freight moving in and to Alaska without delays or issues. Alaskan businesses already have a challenge of getting materials to Alaska on time and in good condition. Let's add a lot of red tape to the mix, and that can only just delay things and cause additional expenses to the bottom line of everyone's business. In my industry, we're always planning for the future. What will it look like? Predictability is very important to us and to our customers. And if we can't offer competitive rates year after year, how would that impact the businesses who hire the employees and grow their business in Alaska? I feel that all businesses owners want to see a profit for all the hard work and the commitment that they put into their companies. Uncertainty in a tax structure would make that incredibly difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Sarah?
I know, Joan, you said that this is not something that you're normally part of. I'm intentionally not a lawyer. In my life, it's definitely not something I've wanted to do. I've kind of intentionally avoided that part of our business. And I prefer policy. I prefer sound policy making. I got my master's in public policy, and I came to Doyon in order to do policy and help Doyon assess policy. And that's what I've been doing for 10 years, and, engaged in the public process and engaged in hearings down in Juneau. And that's like, if there's a question that the state needs to look at, punt this to the legislature to address more fully. They're going to have a robust discussion in the next 4 months after the election. And they're going to have to look at how to fund the state. There's going to have to be a lot of questions examined on how it can do. And by voting no on this measure that happens to be very flawed, that has legal risks, that has uncertainty built into it, they can vet some kind of policy and fiscal plan for our state. And one of the things I commend the chamber for doing is having a political forums process where we can talk to all of the candidates about their plans for our state. With this ballot measure, we can't do that. It's yes or no. You have to vote yes or no. And there's no amending it. There's no fixing it before it passes. And even after it passes, the legislature's hands would be tied for the next 2 years. And so, right now I would recommend a no vote. Anybody who doesn't know what to do, it doesn't foreclose the state on having a discussion about policy and fiscal planning for the state. That's all before us right now. Why bite off protracted litigation for the state? And instead, let's have a robust discussion by our elected officials over the next several months.
Thank you, Sarah. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Our shareholders at Tower Hill Mines, they frequently ask me to update them on the general state of affairs regarding environmental litigation and permitting. Many in the mining industry accept the good fact that Alaska's geology It's very competitive on a worldwide basis for finding potentially viable mineral deposits. And we do have world-class mineral deposits here. Yet it's the long timeline for permitting and the risk of environmental litigation that often presents the biggest uncertainty in our business. So increasing the risks of litigation delay would certainly serve to impede getting to a yes investment decision. And Alaska will not benefit by making it harder for industry to invest. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Kara?
Well, again, I think with ballot measures, this is often the case. As I mentioned, back in 2018 in Stand for Salmon, Stand for Alaska, we knew there was going to be a lot of litigation risk, and this is no different. The Department of Law, when they analyzed the ballot initiative application a year ago, said that there are a lot of complexities, areas that are difficult to understand, likely going to lead to litigation, has a lot of constitutional issues involved. And again, I think, if the legislative process isn't perfect, no one ever says that it is. But if you look back at the major changes that the industry has gone through in 2007, when we had ACEs, that was a 5-week special session. There were over 30 legislative hearings. 6, I think, had public testimony. Many Fairbanks Chamber members probably participated in that process. The Senate Bill 21 in 2013 had over 50 legislative hearings. So again, while the legislative process isn't perfect, that vetting, that process identifies these areas of interpretation, undefined terms, constitutional issues, and they get worked out. This is a take it or leave it, where the legislature cannot amend it in any significant way for 2 years. And the litigation would probably start almost immediately if this were to pass in 28 days. So I think you've raised a really good point. We're not immune to litigation. We know that every major project, especially from outside environmental organizations, are going to challenge our permits and projects every step of the way. The industry is used to that type of litigation, unfortunately, but this type of complex litigation that doesn't have a defined set process causes even more uncertainty than before.
Thank you, Kara. And we have a few audience questions, and we have 2 questions, and I think these are probably most appropriate for Kara. So the first question is, isn't it true that the current oil tax structure provides revenue to the state of Alaska? And I also think about royalties, and there's a lot of other things that the oil industry does for the state. How would you answer that question?
We do provide revenue to the state of Alaska today. There is a narrative out there that we no longer pay tax in Alaska, and that is inherently false. We pay royalties, we pay production tax, we pay corporate income tax as long as prices don't go too low. That has a little asterisk, and property tax. In fact, a lot of our property tax, most of our property tax goes to local governments like the Fairbanks North Star Borough to pay for the infrastructure that goes through the borough. So over the last 6 years, on average, we've paid about $3 billion a year in all of those forms of revenue. And since Senate Bill 21 passed, we've paid over $19 billion total. So we are part of the fiscal solution today, and we are the largest private source of revenue to the state by a long ways.
Thank you, Kara. And the second question is, and this may or may not be information you have at your fingertips, but it says how much oil production tax was paid in 2019? And if that information is not readily available next to you, we can always make sure that information is given to members.
If you give me just a minute, I should be able to find it. I do have that here in my handy dandy book here. In 2019, our production tax was just around $600 million in 2019. And so production tax, it's about $600 million in 2019. Production tax is very much influenced by price because we are It's based on production and price. And so, you know, it was a lot higher in 2014 when oil prices were over $110 a barrel. Senate Bill 21 created actually a floor that that we have to pay some level of production tax regardless of how low prices go. So in 2015 and 16, I believe, or 16 and 17, when prices were in the $40 to $45 range, we didn't pay corporate income tax because the state or the industry was losing money, but we still paid production tax in those years. And so the higher the price, the more production tax revenue the state receives. Under the previous tax system of ACEs, we could have paid zero production tax, but there was this thought in Senate Bill 21 that if prices ever got so low, that would be detrimental. So while it doesn't feel like we've been paying a lot of revenue to the state because we're not 90% of the unrestricted revenue anymore, the fact remains we've paid production tax every single year since the pipeline started producing oil in 1977.
Thank you, Kara. Great points. And as Kara said, corporate income taxes, property taxes, royalties, those also are beneficial to all Alaskans. So now we'll go into the final closing thoughts for all of our panelists. And it's going to be about 1 minute. And if you can make sure that someone watching today understands just one thing about ballot measure 1, what would it be? And we'll start with Kara, we'll go to Joni, and then Sarah, and then Carl.
Well, I think if you remember one thing about ballot measure 1 is this is not about oil companies. Oil companies will find other places to invest regardless of the tax policy here. What this is about is what will happen to Alaska and what will happen to Alaskans like members of the Fairbanks Chamber. So I think at the end of the day, this is being billed as something that the oil industry doesn't care about Alaska. We're all from Texas, and let's just try to tax them more because they can afford it. The reality is if the businesses will choose where to invest, just like I'm sure some of Carl's investors look around the globe and say, where can we get our greatest return? So the people who will be harmed most are Alaskans and businesses that do not have the opportunity to diversify and be more broad-based. So I'm very proud to be very strong, part of a strong coalition. This is probably the most diverse coalition I've ever been involved in, from Uktiavik to Ketchikan. We have over 400 businesses and organizations and growing, Alaska Native corporations, labor unions, and thousands of Alaskans that will be voting no on November 3rd. So again, thank you very much, Chad, and my fellow panelists and all the members of the Chamber.
Thank you, Kara. Joni, last closing comments?
Thank you, Chad. And I have to echo Kara's thoughts there as well. The key thing for me in a closing statement would be is that how fortunate that we are to live and work in an oil and gas rich state. I think about it that we do not have a personal state income tax or a state sales tax, and we receive a dividend. This is due to the oil and gas industry, which pays the state of Alaska to invest and bring the product to the market. They are the ones that take the risk. They're the ones that make sure that we're receiving a benefit. We need a tax structure that we can stick with and that's consistent, and we're not constantly changing the rules that make it impossible for the industry to stay and invest in Alaska. I would also suggest that and recommend that we all vote no on ballot measure 1. Thank you. Sorry for the phone call.
Thank you very much, Joni. Sarah, closing statement?
Well, thanks, Chad. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all our viewers. You know, I would just encourage you to vote no on 1. Doyon has come out and is opposing ballot measure 1. It's a formal opposition. The ANCSA Regional Association, which is made up of all of the regional corporations, all of the regional Native corporations, have come out and opposed it. Doyon in April, right before the pandemic, we were having a strong year in Alaska's oil field. We had most of our rigs working. Most of them were working for ConocoPhillips. And by the end of April, a month later, we were down to 2. And by the end of May, we were down to 1. And we would really like to get back to work. We'd really like to get back to work, and it'll be quicker once we all vote no.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Carl, final remarks?
Sure. Most important thing about ballot measure 1 is to vote, and to vote no. Complex tax policy should never be made by ballot initiative, because there's no opportunity for dialogue or input that ensures our state's most critical industry will not be permanently damaged. The proponents of ballot measure 1 don't have all the answers, and they don't understand the very industry they're trying to tax. As an example, some years ago, one legislator from Fairbanks, who in fact now publicly supports ballot measure 1, introduced a bill to keep the Flint Hills refinery from price gouging because he was convinced they were making too much money. Not long after that, Flint Hills shut down and pulled out of Alaska, shut down that critical piece of infrastructure. And it wasn't because they were making too much money. So the proponents of this measure just don't understand the industry. And the fact is, the industry in Alaska is not healthy now due to low prices. Most of us understand this. And we cannot risk kicking our largest and most important industry in the teeth at any time, but especially not now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. So for all of our members, I have a few closing remarks and some housekeeping things as we look to the future for Fairbanks Chamber. So I want to thank all of our panelists. That was a great discussion, good substantive analysis. I think the viewers got some good information to digest. And to our online viewers, I also want to thank everybody for joining us today. So as a reminder, we have 2 political forums next week, both for the state legislature. On Tuesday, October 13th, we will hear from candidates for House Districts 1 and 5. And on Wednesday, October 14th, we will hear from the candidates for House Districts 2 and 6. If you're not sure which district you live in or which candidates are running, you can find all that information, good information, on the political forums page at the fairbankschamber.org website. Thank you very much today, and happy voting, Fairbanks.